Hello, my name is Nicholas Deeb, and I'm going to present my project, final project for CSCIE 222, Foundations of Large Language Models. So the project name is Early Signs of Backgrounds using LLM-based sentiment analysis. So I want to start giving a brief context of bank runs. So what we know is that bank runs have caused some of history's most devastating economic collapses. And actually they have wiping out savings of society and destroying the financial system within days. There are two examples that are quite clear that happened in the US. The first one was the Washington Mutual in 2008, which within 10 days, they were withdrawn 17 billions, and this caused financial distress for the institution and almost was bankrupt and was acquired by JP Morgan for only 2 billion. Um, the other one is the Silicon Valley Bank in 2023, where 42 billion were withdrawn in a single day. And was done after a panic spread on Twitter. And this was known as the first social media driven bank run in history. So in order to predict when a bank run is going to happen, for regulators, it's very important to have leading indicators that actually can help them detect when a bank run happened and avoid the consequences of having a bank run on the economic system. So early detection is critical, but traditional systems that normally regulators do or have uh, are designed to look backward and not forward. For example, regulatory filings are published quarterly or annually. So at the time the financial distress is visible, the run has already started, and the regulator cannot have um, any actions in order to prevent from happening. Also, the traditional stress tests that regulators do in order to understand financial distress or stress in financial institutions are backward looking, and they measure past performance. They are not real-time depositor confidence, actually. One example is SBB was actually rated satisfactory by regulators in late 2022. And actually we saw that it had a bank run in early 2023. So a real-time sentiment monitor could give regulators hours or even days or even months to act before withdrawals become they become uncontrollable and the financial institution goes to bankruptcy. So the aim of this project is to detect whether LLM sentiment analysis of tweets can actually close this gap that regulators have, and also provide real-time early warning before depositors start to withdraw their money in a massive way. So for this, three pre-trained LLM models were applied, zero shot, to 1.7K tweets about SVB and Signature Bank. The core instrument that I'm using is daily distress score, which actually is a ratio of negative tweets weighted by retweet count. I am also using a control group of healthy banks, for example, JP Morgan or Bank of America, in order to validate institution specificity. And looking at a 6-month time window from October 2022 to March 2023 to use a calm baseline and a full crisis period to understand what happened before and during the crisis. So I want to start with giving a brief context of the timeline of events of what happened for these two banks. So SBB and SBNY were already having some troubles in October 2022. The Fed was sent a supervisory letter that examines flag risks models for SBB and also for SBNY. There was known that it has a lot of exposure to crypto and its stock was declining. On early February 2023, a Financial Times article was published about the financial troubles that SBB was having, and right after that, in almost March 29 and 10 of 2023, these banks had a bankruptcy and a bank run as well. And actually, the FDIC had to took over to SBB, and also SBNY was closed by the regulators. So I want to start with how I use the data. So essentially, I use Apify to scrap Twitters, scrap tweets. I'm not using an API to connect to X, essentially because it's very expensive. But this, with the help of Apify, what I'm doing is scrapping tweets over this time span and essentially having three runs. So one run is of 648 tweets for SBB and SBNY that I'm going to call it the calm period. That is essentially the blue line that we have here. Then the run two, that is the crisis period for these two banks, essentially here, and also a control group for the tweets that we had during all the period for the control banks, that is the green line that we have here. Essentially, what we can see is that, as expected for these two banks, the number of tweets spikes when the crisis started to happen. Now, with the data, I'm going to use three models to understand whether a tweet is flagged as negative or a positive or essentially if they have positive or negative sentiment with these three models. So the first model is Finbird, that is essentially training financial news. It can understand financial vocabulary, but is blind to social media language. The model is Twitter Robert A, which is actually trained with Twitter language. It can understand informal language, but it does not understand financial language. And the other one is Fine Tweetbird, which has combines let's say the two domains. It's trained with 10 million financial tweets, so it essentially can captures knowledge of financial language, but also Twitter language. Now, how was the pipeline? Essentially, the pipeline was the step one was collecting the data. So using API5 to scrap the queries bank. Here, I didn't use any crisis keywords in order to not to bias the data collection. It was done only in English and deduplicated. So for step two in the process, there was a priority pairs timestamp and also filter date window. Also, I dropped the short texts and tag by bank entity. In step three, I did the inference. So each tweet was passed through all the three models. Zero shot, using zero shot, softmax probabilities were computed, and with argmax label were assigned. And in step four, the distress score was calculated. Essentially, what it captures is the ratio of negative tweets weighted by the retweets in order to understand how much distress score or how negative tweets are in relation for a specific bank in a specific day in relation to the tweets of that day. So the output that we have is the daily time series per institution, and that is plotted versus the stock price that I'm going to see in the next slide. Now, here, this is one of the most important graphs of the study, and what we see here is essentially that the stock price is the black line plotted against the distress score. In this case, the distress score that I use is Finbird. We're going to see in the next pages how the distress score between different models is compared, but essentially here what we can see is that we had a spike in the distress score in late October, which was mainly because of the Fed warnings about the models that this bank was using. And after that, we saw a slight drop in the stock price, and then an increase in the stock price. But the most important thing here is that in late February, the distress score spikes, given the Financial Times article that was published and was highly retweeted. And here we start to see that after the Financial Times article was published, we start to see a decline in the price of the stock. But most importantly, this was a leading indicator that after this spike in the distress score, we can see that the bank run came. Here was when the FDIC took over the institution, given the bank had a bank run. So essentially, what we can see here is that a regulator could monitor this score on February 22, and we would have a 15-day window to investigate before actually happened a collapsed when the bank actually collapsed or had the bank run. Then the other bank that I was examining at is SBNY, and what we can see here in this bank is that what was happening is that it had a constant distress score, high distress score, um, and essentially the stock price was flat until the day that the SBB was broke, and in that day actually the stock price went down. Essentially, what we can mention for this bank is that it had a lot of troubles that were already being signaled by this indicator already. The stock price was not reflecting that when actually it happened, the crisis that was in March 10. Now, if we see the control banks, what we can see is actually that the three indicators, essentially the same indicator but for different models, they were flat during the period, and they spike a bit during the collapse of these two banks, mainly when we see the tweets that were written on that day, where people asking if their money were actually safe, mentioning this bank. But after the crisis happened, these banks were completely healthy, didn't have any issues. And what we can see is that although this spiked a bit, it wasn't as it didn't have the same spike as the other two banks, which actually got broke. Now, if we compare the three models, we can see that Twitter Robert A is essentially very similar to Finbird. But given that Tweetbird is trained using Twitter and financial data, it is a bit more sensitive than the other two indicators. The only let's say, drawback of using Tweetbird, it could be that it could be very sensitive and capture some noise and not necessarily showing when a bank is really in trouble. So what can we conclude for this is essentially that LLM-based sentiment analysis can anticipate a financial distress. This is confirmed across the two banks that I analyzed. And essentially what we saw was that SBNY, we saw that we have a 5-month early warning driven by visible crypto exposure. Also, we saw that in SBB, there was a sentiment that was spiked on February 2022. The moment that the Financial Times article was published, and this was 15 days before the bank run happened. And also the controls backs essentially were flattened. And this confirms that the indicator is institution specific and not general market noise. So strength limitation and future work. What we can see here is that the strength of this indicator is that it can detect a distress in real time. It's also institution specific. The limitation is that is having a small data set. We need to increase the number of tweeters to better train the model. And also the other limitation is that there wasn't calculated precision and recall, given that there is no ground truth labels. So there was not a human that actually was labeling the tweets. So for future work, we should extend the baseline to 2022 and also apply to other banks such as First Republic, Credit Suisse. And also we can add Claude and GPT as a ground truth labeler in order to combine this with in order to understand if actually the labels are that the model are producing are good. Now, to conclude, social media sentiment can serve as an early warning system for bank runs. We saw that in Signature Bank, we were having a 5-month warning before actually something happened. For Silicon Valley Bank, it showed a 15-day leading signal from the Financial Times article that was highly retweeted, and also